This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Well, hey everyone, it's Mark Bayer. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of When Science Speaks. Today's episode is brought to you by Bayer Strategic Consulting in Washington, D.C., which helps scientists and engineers get funding, gain influence, and build relationships with their most important stakeholders, whether that's potential employers, policymakers, or the public. It is such a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Roshni Rao on the show today. Roshni is the inaugural Director of PHutures, which is the new resource for PhDs and Postdocs at Johns Hopkins University, focused on professional development, life design, and connections. Roshni is an expert at utilizing innovative and divergent thinking to connect PhDs with opportunities to fulfill their life ambitions. She's a strong proponent of experiential learning. She's interested in designing learning environments and instruction to transform knowledge into knowledge in practice. I just love that. Prior to leading PHutures at Johns Hopkins, Roshni served as Associate Director of Postdoctoral Affairs at NIH's National Institute on Aging, where she pioneered a range of innovative programs, such as using professional-level photography and graphic design to increase engagement and active participation in career development activities. Also creating and implementing what she called the Career Spotlight Series to educate and expose trainees to various career options after graduate and postdoctoral training, and also establishing and co-leading the Be Well at Work program to build resilience, create a culture of wellness, and foster collaboration among the trainees, along with many other high-impact programs and initiatives. Before joining NIA, Roshni was an immunologist and postdoctoral scientist at the FDA, where she evaluated the immunogenicity of therapeutic proteins to support regulatory policy, among other activities. Roshni received her Ph.D. in biomedical sciences from the University of South Carolina and her B.S. honors in microbiology and immunology from the University of Otago. Welcome to the show, Roshni. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here today.
So, as I mentioned in the intro, you're the very first director of the new PHutures initiative at Johns Hopkins. And I would love for you to share with our listeners more details about PHutures and your goals for the initiative.
Sure. So PHutures is a professional development and career education office at Johns Hopkins University that focuses on training PhDs and postdocs to be better prepared, ready, and confident for a number of career paths. We often find, and I'm aware because I've been there, that we get great academic training in our graduate schools and postdoc training, but sometimes we tend to neglect the other skills required to make a transition into a job. And those translational and relational skills is what we help students to discover and put to practice at the PHutures office. So the emphasis of the office is not on let's just go out and procure any job, but hopefully land a job that will be fulfilling. We do this by introducing the students to the concept of designing a fulfilling life, not just a career. So in addition to these overarching goals, as the office develops further, experiential learning and mentoring will also become a huge part of our program. And that's PHutures in a nutshell.
That is so exciting. I love it. You also started in your leadership role in January of this year, so only a few months before COVID-19. Of course, these massive changes in how universities and really all of us are operating. And, what can you tell us? What's it been like, and how have you been able to address and overcome challenges that are associated with all these, major on-the-fly changes that are required, as at the same time, you are leading this really important work at Johns Hopkins?
What a way to start a new job. That's what I was thinking. 2020 is a year for the history books.
Right.
Fortunately for me, and I knew when I applied to this role that I would work for a fantastic visionary boss. So Dr. Ph.D. I say this for a number of reasons, because first, I was guided by Ph.D. that the first 90 days of your job should be dedicated to listening and relationship building with various student groups, campus partners, and stakeholders. So even before COVID forced us all into quarantine, I had embarked on what they call a listening tour and had met and mapped out almost all the folks who would be partners in the process of launching the office and reaching the students. So I'm glad I was able to introduce myself and get introduced in person. But when we became 100% virtual, I definitely saw also a unique opportunity to introduce the office and reach more students in a way that would have taken much longer had we been on campus.
Right.
I think technology and social media make for a great combination to scale up and reach students across campuses. And so I just dove into virtual programming and introduced myself along the way. I think it has just helped to be generally adaptable and flexible and continue to be so as the situation changes. Farouk himself had mentioned earlier, he's very forward thinking anyway. And so he had encouraged us all to lean into utilizing tech way before any of us could have seen COVID coming. So I think we were all set up well for sudden changes. Now I think I'm able to scale up, like I'd mentioned, and able to connect with students in Texas or LA, and even students from Rome are signing in. And it's definitely helped our commitment to be more accessible to all.
That is fantastic. And, it's really interesting because as you were talking about how you yourself have adjusted, these are qualities and attributes that you're probably emphasizing with trainees and PhD students too, who are being involved in Phutures.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And, along those lines, I'm interested, Roshni, what kinds of programming Phutures is offering now? Is it being delivered virtually? Probably that's the case. But, just kind of your vision for the types of programming that Phutures will be offering across these different dimensions that you described.
Okay. Well, since March, you're right, everything's been 100% virtual. Student consultations, review of LinkedIn, resume, career strategy and planning has all been through either Zoom or Microsoft Teams. As for programming, there's been plenty. For instance, on Mondays, students can drop into informal small group sessions about interviewing or how to build up confidence during grad school, to workshopping ways to reframe dysfunctional beliefs. So every week, students have tuned in to what I call PhD chats with alumni and experts from various career fields such as UX research, science policy, or consulting, and have begun to learn about the decision-making process and steps other people took to land their jobs. Every other week, we have hosted a training workshop like how to leverage LinkedIn or resume mistakes to avoid. So workshops that actually encourage students to now put into practice what they're learning as we teach those techniques to them. Another important topic we cover is career planning, particularly to international students and postdocs. So plenty and more sessions are recorded and available to view later on a Phutures YouTube channel. So there's a lot of focus on content building as well. And, we want to create these small digestible pieces of information that could come in handy when thinking about next steps.
So great. And it kind of leads into my next question. When you referenced international students who are all over the U.S. also, we have many international listeners. And as a leader who earned her PhD in the U.S., did her postdoc in Washington, D.C., your perspective, your experience on the international PhD and postdoc lifestyle comes from your own firsthand experience. And, if you could comment on how being a non-U.S. citizen studying and training in the U.S. at the PhD and postdoc levels, both how it ties to career exploration, and then also, how to address issues, as Director of Phutures, some of these specific challenges like navigating visas, for example.
Yeah, I can speak from my own experiences, as you said, as an international grad student and then postdoc. At that moment, when I was an international student, my career plans included procuring a visa, adjusting to a new environment and country, adapting to the way research was conducted in my lab or department, then dealing with said research, meeting the expectations of my advisor, handling the general ups and downs of grad school that most people feel. But then on top of that, navigating interpersonal relationships through it all while trying to stay competitive, because maybe as an international student, I was not eligible to apply for many a grant. So that was already a lot. I wasn't thinking of my own actual next steps in terms of career. I feel like I may have wondered, but I didn't have the guidance or the tools in place to understand what would help me discover what I would love to do. Then again, there isn't there's plenty that an international student would love to do or aspire to be, but it isn't helpful to say to them, go do it, because restrictions to a visa don't always allow you to do what you would absolutely love to do.
Mm-hmm.
So having learned from my own experiences, the best strategy for an international student or postdoc is to have a plan and to discover early on our abilities and be aware of our limitations early in the process rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
In having a plan or multiple plans and empowering ourselves with information about the status of our visas, when to apply for an OPT, what are the career paths that sponsor a visa for me, what companies are open to hiring talented folks. We need to do that groundwork early. Things that I didn't do that I wish I'd known later on, or earlier on rather. I would suggest being communicative with the office on campus that specifically deals with international services throughout the process. And in the meantime, I think understanding that our international perspectives can be a strength.
Mm-hmm.
I encourage students and postdocs to get engaged with student organizations on campus, apply for leadership positions, apply for awards, say yes to any opportunity to attend conferences, meet people, go to professional development trainings in year 1 or 2 instead of year 5. Put these experiences on your resume, tell your story. A combination of your unique story and talents could just be the thing that helps you discover what inspires you, and also that thing that could help you get hired. This is my advice in hindsight, and hindsight's always 2020. So I wish I'd known this earlier on, and that's what I strive to do with the Phuture's plans as well for international students and postdocs.
Yeah, your trainees and students are just going to get the best information from you and your team there. It is just really exciting to hear you talk about that, and having lived it through firsthand experience and now giving your trainees and students those insights. It's just so fantastic, just really, really great. And, I want to address another issue that stubbornly persists, which is, particularly in academic environments, but not exclusively in academic environments. And I'm talking about imposter fears or imposter syndrome. As someone who's now in a leadership role, one of the most prestigious U.S. universities, Hopkins, does imposter syndrome still manifest itself? And how do you help PhD students and postdocs cope with and hopefully conquer imposter syndrome?
Yes, imposter fear is my perpetual friend that accompanies me on my life's journey, no matter what step of career I am in. Absolutely. Yes. So in fact, when you reached out to me to ask to do this podcast, it reared its ugly head again and said, wow, someone wants to hear what I have to say. So for a moment, it shows up and it's a fear. I have simply learned to accept and work through these fears. So what I tell students and postdocs first is that they are not alone. Anyone from their peers to their PIs feel this way at any given time during their careers. Mm-hmm. The academic environment, which in fact is filled with very high-performing, high-achieving folks, is a great place for imposter syndrome to linger and prevent us from stretching ourselves. So you're not alone. And I always tell my story openly about that feeling, and I encourage others to share their story. I definitely tell students that there are a number of things that you can do to confront these fears. For example, tracking your achievements, even if it's something small. Like today, I organized my desktop folders, and that's all I did, but it felt great. You don't always have to aim for the big goals all the time. Like try to reach for the more low-hanging fruit to begin with. Another thing I really stress upon is ask for help. Whenever I've had moments of feeling like I didn't belong, I reached out to mentors, friends, a partner, and a therapist and asked for help and guidance. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we're too close to the problem and it takes an outside person to help put things into perspective. Another technique I can think of that has helped me immensely has been to really work on reframing some of the dysfunctional beliefs that show up as negative thoughts. For example, if you say to yourself, I'm terrible at public speaking, I will never do it. You can reframe that thought by saying, maybe public speaking is a skill I could improve upon. What are the resources out there that could help me improve? That very slight shift in thinking has helped me look imposter fear in the eye and say, okay, how do I get past you now? Mm-hmm. All this, I think, takes practice. And when you intercept these thoughts persistently, it also takes a lot of energy. So I tell students, be compassionate to yourself. you're not expected to know everything. No one ever does. You're still learning. And if you can be as kind to yourself as possible, you will learn.
Just wonderful advice. Thank you for that, Roshni. Really, really powerful information. I know that's going to help a lot of people listening, and I'm sure it's going to help a lot of folks that you are interacting with in your leadership role at Hopkins. We had a chance also to talk offline a little bit about the value of relationship building. I think this buzzword, relationship building, or know your audience, these things get repeated over and over again, and sometimes my pet peeve is, people just sort of saying these terms without explaining really what's underneath them, how to achieve them, what, it's not just say like, know your audience, well, what are you supposed to know about your audience and find that information? So it would be great if you could talk about your perspective, your insights, your experiences with relationship building, what you mean by that. And then we'll have a couple of follow-up questions that I wanted to chat with you about, maybe just starting by talking about like what's underneath this term.
Okay. So I think people are more so familiar with the term networking. And for some, networking can either mean something exciting, but to most, it means something dreadful. Because for those who dislike the concept of networking and find it all to be almost too transactional, I like to ask them to view networking as relationship building. And that's why that's how I use the term. As a student looking to connect with others, I feel that relationship building could be as simple as having a conversation with others and showing interest in their work. That's it. It does not have to mean that you're asking something of others or that you have to engage in shallow conversation. I illustrate simple ways to do this with students. Like maybe if you're using the LinkedIn platform, engaging with your LinkedIn connections by liking posts, commenting, saying happy birthday, promoting others. Or if you're reaching out to people for an informational interview, follow up with the person after. Keep them posted about your career as it progresses. These are very low risk relationship building opportunities. I let students know that this isn't about instant gratification. It's a slow and hopefully fruitful process of facilitating connections with others and actually bringing value to a relationship like you would do with any other relationship. And that's how I viewed relationship building in a nutshell.
That is so important. Absolutely. A lot of people don't do something as simple as you just described, which is, you reach out to someone, they provide some information, maybe they refer you to someone else, but you'd never get back to that first person and say, hey, here's what happened. Here's kind of the end of the story. And I just love mentoring. I mentor a lot of scientists who ask me about science policy and science communication. And I'm always happy to do it. I'm excited to do it. It's nice when someone gets back to me and say, hey, I ended up getting that position that you recommended. But if I had to count how many times it's happened, it's definitely not more than one hand's full of fingers there. But in any case, something definitely to emphasize. That's really how you build these relationships. And, can you talk a little bit about maybe how relationship building has benefited your own career?
Relationship building has opened many, many doors for me in my career in the most unexpected ways. For example, I received an interview with a consulting firm during my postdoc with no prior consulting experience because one day I simply decided to reach out via LinkedIn to a fantastic person for an informational interview. Although I didn't end up taking that position, years later, I'm still in touch with them. And now they're sending me folks to talk about career paths and everything. And I've updated them about anything that's happened in my life that was meaningful and important. So it's just very simple moments like that. Another example is that I got out of my comfort zone a few years ago and decided to write a piece about motherhood and auditioned with that piece to be cast in a show about motherhood. And it turns out the producers of that show would then become my future work colleagues at the NIH. That's how the way the world works. By putting myself out there and not expecting anything, I think I've tended to draw opportunity to myself. Again, the key there is not to expect anything. It's just to provide value to the world. The other day, I posted my perspective on a current event that's happening on Facebook. A while later, a Facebook friend from that motherhood show asked me if I could write a short piece for her magazine And just today, a few hours ago, that piece was published. So you just never know what connecting and interacting with people can lead to.
Mm-hmm.
I emphasize every time I get a chance with students, just talk to people, show interest, have conversation, offer up a perspective. You have a perspective, offer it up, follow up, respect people's time, promote other people. And by virtue of being a giver, I feel much will be given to you. And, I haven't always been proficient at networking. I've had to practice my networking. I had to learn what was working and what wasn't effective. I've even had to rethink the way I ask questions to others. And in a very humbling way, I've had to restructure my sense of entitlement. People don't owe us anything, especially in the LinkedIn world where most active and passive relationship building is occurring. I feel like if I could sum it all up, you get as much as you put into it. And that's one way I could sum up how relationship building has worked and not worked for me.
Well, those are the last words of the episode, Roshni. Such wise counsel. Johns Hopkins, your students, your trainees are just so lucky to have you. This is just going to be, you're such a wise, experienced leader. Yeah, and it's great to talk with you. I'm really, really enjoying it. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Mark.
And listeners, thanks so much for joining us on this episode of When Science Speaks. I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe. Check us out on the web at whensciencespeaks.com, and we'll see you next time.